Dr. Sharrett is his one granddaughter, her team reached the state finals in soccer down in Cincinnati. So he is down there. Their first game starts in a little bit. And you look outside and you think, is this an ideal day to be watching the soccer game outside? No, but I guess once you have grandchildren, you did for your kids, you did for your grandchildren. So he's there. So we're going to pick up back in the book of Exodus and what we can learn from the life of Moses here over the next couple minutes. And we kind of key verse is actually 1 Corinthians 10:6. When you look at the book of Exodus, it says this. Let me look up 1 Corinthians 10:6. It talks about the events of Exodus as a cautionary tale for churches then and churches now. 1 Corinthians 10:6 says this. Now these things took place an example that we might not desire evil as they did. And so when we look at the traveling of the Egyptians, the people out of Egypt through the wilderness to Mount Sinai where they are now, and they've spent a great deal of time at Mount Sinai. Moses is going back and forth several times. God is formalizing his agreement with the people of Israel at that time. They go from being, so we're like, kind of called you my people, we're going to make it official, we're going to ratify it in a covenant, and then move forward and how faithful they were or weren't to God through the rest of their traveling as they approached the promised land. These things are all example for us. And things don't exactly happen in churches now and then the exact same way, but the principles still remain. So we're going to turn to Exodus chapter 32. We're sort of on the second half of that right now. Moses is in the midst of spending 40 days up on the mountain in the presence of God. And while he is doing that, the Israelites do the unthinkable. They had heard in the weeks prior, they had heard the voice of God speak to them. They audibly heard the Ten Commandments. And they knew that Moses was going to be on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. There's a theory that they sort of miscounted. Like he's been gone 40 days, but not the 40th night. And so they got it off by maybe like 12 hours or an evening. And they decided, hey, we don't know what has happened to Moses. He's not coming back when he said he would. And so we're going to build a golden calf. And we're going to worship a golden calf. They took jewelry they had taken from Egypt, and they melted it down and used a tool to shape a calf. And so God tells Moses, you won't believe what your people are doing down there. And Moses intercedes, asks, hey, God, I want you to have mercy on these people. If for no other reason, you should have mercy on them because you have tied your name to them. If they come out into the wilderness and die, your name is going to be smeared and thought less of through the nations. And you don't want to do that. And so in verse 14, it says the Lord relented. It wasn't over. He just sort of hit the pause button. And then in verses 15 through 20, we see what happens as Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, knowing that the Israelites had built this golden calf and were engaging in pagan worship. So starting in verse 15 of Exodus 32, then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and the back, they were written. The tablets were the work of God, And the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a noise of war in the camp." But Moses said, "It is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of crying of feet, but the sound of singing that I hear." As soon as he came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it into powder and scattered it on the water and made the people of Israel drink it. We're going to stop there and talk about that paragraph for a little bit before we move on to what happens next after that. And one of the things you think of, I think a lot of us have this mental image of Moses walking down, holding the Ten Commandments. We always think they kind of look like the Ten Commandments are always drawn the same way. We probably think of the old Charlton Heston movie, him coming down. And I don't know, we probably realize, but probably have drawn attention to it again, that these tablets were written, one part says they were written by the finger of God. And so to think about how special and how sacred these things were, and for Moses to see what was happening and how angry he had to be to smash them and break them would be unbelievable. Makes you think, one of the things I was thinking, like, well, what is the most valuable thing that I've ever broken? Right? And then the other thing is like, what is the most valuable thing that I have ever broken on purpose? It's like, no matter how mad you get at something, like, oh, if I break it, I'm going to have to replace it. And Moses did this to this, that which was irreplaceable, the covenant of God written by God's own hand on these tablets of stone. And the people didn't even get to see him, and he had smashed them. And so I want to take a minute to think about how angry Moses was, and whether that was the degree to which that was an appropriate reaction. Sometimes people say that they are seeing red. They say, you know what? This situation happened and I just saw red and I did this. It's like they were overcome with their anger. And there are times when anger is misunderstood when it comes to the Christian, especially in this, I think. Some people say a Christian should never be angry, which I don't think that is the case at all. First of all, before you would say that, you'd say, well, Jesus got angry. Think about what he did when he went into the temple and saw people buying and selling. Now, does the text say he was angry? No, not specifically. But he flipped over the table. He took a whip and drove out the animals they were buying and selling there. And he called it a den of thieves. That sounds like someone that is unhappy by what's going on. And it is it's justified in this case. There's in Mark chapter 3, there is an account of a man who came to Jesus with an injury on his hand, and there's a tradition that's not verified in the Bible, but it's a tradition that it was a stonemason whose hand had been crushed in an accident at work. And so if you had an on-the-job injury like that, your life was essentially over. And he came to Jesus on the Sabbath asking to be healed, and Jesus knew that the religious leaders did not want him to heal the man. And in the Greek, his response talks about him being indignant, which means to shudder or quiver. So there's being mad and there's being kind of upset enough where you start to shake, which doesn't happen all the time, right? And so Jesus was angry in this instance, in the instance where a leper approached him. He was indignant, shaking. When Lazarus died, there was a feeling of indignation at the situation, at death itself. And so it's interesting. So if we want to say, well, you should never get angry, Jesus got angry on several occasions. It's what you're getting angry about. And so the question is, if you're experiencing angry, what is godly anger or man's anger? What's the difference between those two? What am I experiencing? And how is it then expressing itself? Is it expressing itself in a controlled or an uncontrolled, a productive or an unproductive way? I found this resource that talked about the difference between the two. It talks about the difference of source and motivation. Human anger often is influenced by our ego, our pride, our fear, or misunderstanding, and it's related to our personal circumstances. Divine anger is rooted in God's perfect justice and righteousness. It is about when harm is caused to the created order or the created order is destroyed. It's about injustice. It's selfless, not selfish. You think about some of the things that, I don't know, you're driving on the road, someone, cuts you off in traffic. Maybe you honk your horn, hey, I'm here. And they respond, it upsets you. They respond with some sort of gesture. Maybe that upsets you. And it's like, well, that's not really anything to truly get upset about, but we get our egos bruised a little bit sometimes. So what's motivating? What's the source of anger? The nature of anger is something we consider too. It is often, human anger is often reactive, unpredictable, and can lead to the loss of control. It is also sometimes disproportionate. So we take a small thing and blow it up into a big thing. Divine anger, God's anger, is slow and deliberate and controlled and provides a measured response. If you think about the outcomes, human anger results in conflict, regret, and harm, seeking to punish. It can be impulsive. Divine anger aims at restoring people and relationships and justice, and promotes reconciliation and healing. So you think about the difference. There's some real practical examples. If you say, what's the right way to handle anger or not? There's a couple of, I read a couple stories about husbands and wives who got upset with each other. And in these two cases, it's always the wife getting upset with the husband. I guess sometimes that happens. I mean, this may surprise some of you, but sometimes there's conflict in marriage. But anyway, this one husband comes up to his wife and he said, you know what? There's this amazing thing. I never feel like you're angry with me. You always seem to be happy when you are dealing with me. You're never angry with me. Why is that? And she said, oh, it's real simple. Every time I get upset with you, I clean the toilet. He's confused. He's like, clean the toilet? How does that help with your anger towards me? She said, well, I use your toothbrush, and that makes me feel better. We'd say, like, hey, that's not the right way to handle anger. Like, at no point would you say, hey, there's no right way to handle there in any relationship. There's going to be conflict. Maybe that's not the right way to handle it. There was another couple. The man was poking around in the attic, and he found this box. And his wife liked to knit. And he found in this box 3 bonnets and $2,500. So he asked his wife, what is this? I had no idea we had this money. And she responded, well, every time I got mad at you, I knitted a bonnet. He looked at and they'd been married for 25 years at this point. He counted 1, 2, 3 bonnets. It's like every time you get mad, you make a bonnet. That means in 25 years, you've only been mad at me 3 times. That's pretty good, isn't it? He says, well, what about the $2,500 in there? Where did that come from? And she said, well, that's from selling the bonnets, all right? Pretty good way to express your anger, right? That's a productive way to express anger, and probably not, because it was always bottled up. And that's the thing. It's like, hey, if we are upset about the correct things and express it the right way, then anger like what Jesus expressed, anger like what Moses had. Think about Moses' anger. It was completely justified. These people had vowed themselves to God, and before they ever left, if you think of Mount Sinai as the place where the two parties were joined, kind of like a wedding, these people had cheated on God before they even left for the honeymoon. And it's unthinkable. What was the first of the 10 commandments? Don't make an idol, have no other gods. And they said, well, you know what? The ones we're going to break are the first 2. While Moses out there speaking to God. And so you could ask the question, was breaking the tablets the best way to do it? I don't know, but you understand why he did it. And so I would say that there are times when we should be angry and express that in the right way. It should be rooted in our own selfishness, but by injustice that goes on in the world. I don't want to get into there's just senseless violence that goes on in our communities and in our world. To not be angry about them would be the real problem. So when it comes to anger, it's all about how we express it. It's about it being proportional and in control. I read about a man in California who had cockroaches in his apartment. And he said, well, I'm not going to call an exterminator. I'm going to handle these cockroaches myself. And so he got these bug bombs. Have any of you ever used a bug bomb before? You kind of set it off in your house and you flee. And I forget how long. You're supposed to be out of your house for a while, right? And I think I've used one once before, and I think it worked. And so usually I think you get like 1 or 2, and even a decent sized house. And this guy said, I just really want to get rid of all these bugs. And so the package says that I'm going to need 2, but I'm going to light 25 in my house, in my apartment. I'm getting rid of these cockroaches once for all. And so he lit all 25 of them and went outside of his house. What he wasn't planning on, because of his disproportional response to the problem at hand, was the fumes were so thick, because he overdid it with the bug bombs, that they reached the pilot light of his furnace and caused an explosion that blew out all his windows, the screen door to his house, and caused $10,000 in damage. And it's sort of a funny mental picture of the screen door flying across the street. And the funny thing is, the next week, the cockroaches were back. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing when we think about the things that upset us and cause us to be angry. Am I kind of like that guy who's overdoing it? Or is my response proportional? There's a couple spots in the Old Testament that talk about this. The first is in Proverbs 29, verse 11. Proverbs 29, verse 11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. Uh, Someone that's a fool says, you know what, when I get angry, I'm gonna explode like a volcano. It's not what we're talking about. Jesus says, in your anger, do not sin. Um, Ecclesiastes 7:9 says this as well. Ecclesiastes 7:9 says this about, man, how long does it take uh, for you to become angry about a situation? It says, be quick not in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. And so if we have really a hair trigger temper about anything, that's a problem as well. And so I guess, and thinking about Moses coming down from the mountain, um, the Ten Commandments, the golden calf, that's one of those stories we learn in Sunday school and VBS, and it sort of becomes, we think about the sort of mechanics of it, but not what's really going on sometimes. And Moses's example can be a thought about what's going on when we get angry about things. What's the right way to handle it? When I get upset, is it something that is about injustice, or is it selfish? Am I responding in the right way? Am I slow to anger or quick? So that's sort of the first thing about this paragraph. The other thing is that you'll realize from reading here, and it's also found in Exodus 24, verse 17 here, the next chapter, Exodus 33:11, is that Joshua is with Moses a lot more than what I realized from previous readings of Exodus. So Moses was not doing this alone. He was always following God and serving God with other people. It was not a solo event. I think that's important to learn. The other thing that we see about this that is extremely interesting, and we know that Moses did that, but maybe we don't think why, is he took that, what did he do with that calf? He ground it up and he put it in their water supply and he made them drink it. The question is, well, why did he do that? That seems like an odd thing to do. We don't know the reason for sure. There's different theories on why Moses ground up the calf and put it in the water. And I think they all make some sense. And it could be all of the above. It doesn't have to be A or B. It could be both. If you ground up the calf and have them drink the water, then that, not only was that idol never going to reappear for it, but the raw material that they used for that disobedience for God was be gone. It also showed the emptiness of sin and idolatry. That even a gold calf, and I mean, it was valuable. It would probably been impressive to see. It can be ground down, swallowed, digested, and be nothing before you know it. They say, I don't know, I've never drank water with gold in it. I don't imagine most of you have, but they say it tastes extremely bitter. You could have a bad taste in your mouth. And so sin should leave a bad taste in your mouth abstractly. But Moses said, well, we want to make this very literal so that you have a physical sensation and a taste to remind you of your disobedience to God. There is another theory that it separated the guilty and the non-guilty. It seems like all the people were not equally culpable in the idolatry that was going on. When Moses finally acts, there's a segment of the population that dies instantly. It's really minor compared to the number of people. And then there are a separate, then other people that died from a plague a little bit later. But it certainly wasn't all the people that were equally guilty and were equally punished. And so there's this thought, and this to me initially sounded like this sounds weird to us because this is not how we do things in modern society. This sounds weird to us that it was a way to tell who was guilty and who was not. If you were guilty, you would have some sort of reaction to the water with the gold in it. If you're innocent, you wouldn't. Which to me, that sounded like the Salem witch trials where I think if they threw you in water and if you sank, you were innocent, but still sinking in the water, which isn't good. And if you were guilty, you'd float. Because the idea was the baptismal waters would reject you if you were a witch. And so that sounds really, well, I don't know. That sounds like not a good thing, and we probably all agree on that. But there is a spot in Leviticus where if a husband thought that his wife was cheating on him, they'd mix something into the water and have her drink it. And if she had a reaction to it, then she was guilty. If not, she was innocent. So it could have been a little bit of that. And so it's tough all the way around. And so things are bad. Finally, in verses 21 through 24 of Exodus 32, I want to go ahead and read that before we close here. Moses finally has this conversation with Aaron. And just to review what happens in the first part of the chapter, the people come to Moses, people come to Aaron and say, Moses has left us high and dry. Make us gods, plural, that'll go before us. He made the golden calf, and when they saw the golden calf, they were celebrating the gods, plural, that went before us. But Aaron seemed to try to hedge it a little bit in that he said, well, we're going to have a feast to the Lord, singular, plural. We're going to use this. So it seems like his idea was we're going to use this idol, which they were not supposed to do, to be a way to worship the one true God, but they were just totally idolatrous in the case. So this is what the conversation goes like between Moses and Aaron. What did this people do to you that you brought such a great sin upon them? And Aaron said, let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people that they are set on evil, which that is true. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. That, in addition to what he said before, is true. So I said to them, let any who have gold take it off. True. So they gave it to me, and I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. Right? That is what? Not true. And if I was, is there ever a time when someone lies to you and they know you're lying and you think to yourself, man, if you're going to lie to me, at least do a little better, make an effort, right? Tell me something believable. Don't insult my intelligence by expecting me to believe this thing. But no, he said, hey, you know what? Poof, out came this calf out of the fire. And so he blamed the people who bore responsibility, and then he just made a lame excuse about the rest. If you want to talk about excuses people make, and people make excuses, we kind of have this gap between we know we should do a certain thing, and then sometimes we don't. And so we feel the need often to explain, well, what do we make of this gap? One of the most fundamental things of that is like people know they should be at work in the morning and they know they should be on time, and often they're late or don't show up. And so People give these reasons. This is why I didn't come to work, and excuses. And here's how I'm going to explain it. I read a couple recently. There was an employee who woke up in a good mood and didn't want to ruin it, so they just decided not to come to work that day. There was another person who said, man, if this is true, this is great. They were at the grocery store checking their blood pressure, which I don't think they even have these anymore. You stick your arm in the cuff, hit the button, tells you your blood pressure. They said the cuff tightened so tight that their arm was stuck in there and they couldn't get out, and they were late for work. And so, man, if that's true, then that's valid. If not, then that's a very creative excuse. Another employee said, I broke my arm reaching to grab a falling sandwich. Who hasn't been there before? Another one said, my coffee's too hot, and so I can't leave for work until it cools down, so you're just going to have to wait a little bit, right? So the excuses are just tough. And when someone else makes them to you, you're just like, oh, man, really? But we have to think maybe, do I ever, when there's this gap, especially when it comes to, I know what God has called me to do. I know what I sometimes don't do that gap. How do I explain that gap? Christians sometimes make these things and make these sort of excuses. Often it's internal, because if we say them out loud, it sounds a little bit ridiculous. Some people say, man, that's just who I am. This thing that God doesn't want me to do, it's just who I am, so I'm going to do it. The next one is learned as kids and keeps being used, and I've heard it used. Man, everyone else is doing this, so I know God doesn't want me to, but I really just kind of want to fit in. That's us, not kids that say that. That's adults as well. Hasn't hurt me yet, or if I upset or offend, it'll upset or offend people if I do what God wants. And so it's just all those things. And as we listen to Aaron's excuse, we realize that some of the ones that we may make are no good as well. So we really are left with one alternative, just to stop. So we got today like this initial reaction of Moses and how he handled his anger, justified, how to express it, and also how excuses are used in conversations when we know the right we should do and whether they are justified or not, and that Moses was always working with someone else. We're meant to live in relationships and community, and he was as well. So were there any, forgot to announce the prayer requests, probably not anything come through. Jerry? That being said, we will close in prayer. Father, we thank you for today. I thank you for how much you love us. I thank you that you are patient with us and slow to anger, and that you seek to restore us. And I pray that we can model our lives after that as well. Help us to seek to follow you and not let excuses that we make be a stumbling block in that way. I thank you for your Son and how he is with us and forgives us and loves us no matter what we do. And we know we need his mercy and grace. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.